proper introduction. But here's my shot at it. Al and I went down to Grays River December 27th of 2007 to buy this guy his first tank of gas for his butterfly big year. Gave him a seasonal park pass, go on all the national parks, and wished him the best of luck. He's the author of numerous books, although I call these dangerous books because it seems whenever I'm finished with them, I want to quit school, quit work, and just go have an adventure. And so I give to you Bob Pyle, who will talk about his butterfly big year, perhaps his new book, Swallowtail Season, which I am sure is going to be the most dangerous book yet.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be back here. I'm always glad to be at my favorite club. I was glad to see those honorifics going on earlier because you all deserve that so much. And you know, Dave's profiles have got to be just about unique in the Navi universe. What an extraordinary body of work to do that every time with a thorough and rigorous and well-presented lore of a particular butterfly. What a wonderful resource that is. And then commonly footnoted by John, bringing us up to date on the taxonomy, the systematics, and the biology of the animals. It's a great tag team, and it's a pleasure to hear every time. I'm glad to be back here. I guess the last time I was here was when I told you what I was going to be doing. How many of you were here in my program, about 14 months ago or something like that, I suppose, to hear that? So a number of you have, and you know the shtick already, so I won't give very much introductory information. I want to start out, however, with a surprise announcement that not very many of my friends know about, but you know, it was a dangerous thing to do, and it was in many ways a challenging and exciting thing to do, and it's hard to stop doing it. Sit on my butt, and I've actually convinced my publisher that it would be better if I did it again and try it even harder because I didn't have any competition, so I would compete against myself and do it a second time around. So I am actually leaving in the morning and doing an April to April and doing it all over again, seeing if I beat my total. No. I am. We're going April 1st to April 1st. Tia, were you not worried? No. Not much. I do want to dedicate this talk tonight to my dear bride and friend, Tia Pyle, who I met Tia at a mushroom class on Upper Campus 42 years ago. And Tia and I had a wonderful time together on parts of this year, and the rest of the time she kept the home fires burning and made it possible for me to do this. And not only that, but kicked my butt back out on the road when it was hard to get back out there. And not only that, but withstood a lot of personal challenges in the process and made sure this happened. So Tia, thank you. I feel it was appropriate that my talk, David Branch, with whom we're staying, who might be able to show up later this evening, an earlier treasurer of the organization. David told us that this talk was announced in one of the many Seattle newspapers. I think he said it was the Times. And so Tia bought it Times, just have it for the files, the scrapbook, and we looked and looked and looked and looked. It was in the sports section. Which is actually rather appropriate because there were many aspects of this past year of my life that had an athletic component to them and actually had some of the aspects of a sporting event. It was a game as well as everything else that it was. You can't help coming to that conclusion. And although I always hope the game and the numbers and all of that would take very much a secondary role to the butterflies themselves and the view of the countryside and the conservation perspective and the encounters with people and landscapes, as it did. Nonetheless, the game was there. It was always there, and it was part of the driver. And it was fun. So it's not entirely inappropriate that this was in the sports section. Only thing is that sports usually involves a competition. And I did not, in fact, have any competitors, as the birding big year people have had, often in the same year, even when Ken Kaufman wrote his masterpiece, Kingbird Highway, which was one of my inspirations and remains one of my inspirations for the book I'm writing. He didn't know at the beginning, but he found a little ways into his big year in 1973 that he had a competitor. And so that, of course, became part of the subtext. And, of course, the more recent book, not nearly as palatable in my view, but still a fun read, called the big year, which traced 3 birders in a single given birding big year. They were actively competing against themselves, and very much that way. I did not have such a competitor. To my knowledge, and I've not yet been disabused of that. I don't think that this has been attempted before. And I expected somebody might pop up during the year and try to do it, but it didn't happen, that I know of. That's not to say I didn't have competitors. I did have competitors, and they will come up later on in my talk. But essentially, you don't see a lot of single-person sports in the sports section. Kind of how it panned out. The other thing that makes it appropriate that it was in the sports section is that the sports involves a lot of statistics, batting averages and so on. And I actually have compiled a number of statistics for this year that I find interesting, and perhaps you will as well. And so I'm going to share a few of those with you in the second part of my presentation. What I did, for those of you who still might not be entirely clear, was to conduct what I call the first butterfly bid year. It would be a heuristic thing to say, except I think it really was the first butterfly bid year. To travel North America, as originally premised, north of Mexico, to try to encounter as many species of butterflies as I could in 1 year. This has been done a lot with birds, and it has achieved high art among the birders. It occurred to me that it would be a remarkable and challenging and possibly delightful thing to do with butterflies. And it happened to be the one idea that I took to my editor and my agent a couple of years ago to try to sell for a new book that they actually glommed onto. And since both my agent and my editor agreed that this would be a book worth doing, that meant that pretty much gave me my running orders for the next couple of years. And so I did. I conducted the first butterfly big year throughout the year 2008 in the calendar year. The rules were my own because I did it first. I got to make them up. They were very similar to the rules that the birding big year people apply, that are actually regulated by there's a group of people around the American Birding Association that keeps track of all this and so on. The rules were simple. The very first one was, of course, all identifications must be considered to the best of my ability certain. And with birds, this usually means a second or third observer and or photograph or detailed field notes. You know, most of you, I think, it was my decision not to take photographs last year. Forgive me for putting it this way, but I produced the very first American field guide with photographs of live butterflies, which was Watching Washington Butterflies. And I love butterfly photography forever, but I haven't kept it, as many of you have. Tia and I, well, Tia finally has a digital camera. I still take slides and everything, but I have not learned the new techniques. And this was no time to do it. Furthermore, having photographed butterflies since 1970, when I took the pictures for Watching Washington Butterflies, I know a lot about what it entails, though I'm not fully familiar with the new equipment. And I know that it takes a lot of time to do it well. I also know that once you got one picture of a chipped one, you want it perfect. You get one that's a little out of focus, you want one that's in focus. You get a female, you want a male. You get a ventral, you want a dorsal. And so pretty soon you photograph one butterfly for 3 hours. And that's fine. That's a wonderful thing to do, but not on a butterfly big. So frankly, I knew it would be a very, very different kind of a trip if I took photographs than if I did not. So I did not take any photographs. Some other people in the field with me took photographs, and some of those I will be sharing with you. I operated primarily by watching, intense watching, which I've been an advocate of for many, many years, and by netting and releasing. I do a lot of that. As you know, I do much of my teaching with netting and releasing, and by some collecting, which I was judicious about, and always conservative about with respect to females, with respect to anything rare, certainly nothing listed or that I felt shouldn't be collected at a given time. Far more conservative than I know some of my colleagues would have hoped in that regard. But at the same time, as you know, these are insects. Males, later in their flight period, have no further contribution biologically. So it becomes a matter of personal preference. And I don't like killing butterflies. I really don't, never have. So I collected conservatively. And generally, when I felt that a voucher specimen would be necessary to establish the proper identification of the population of butterflies I was encountering, or if I was working with some butterflies that John Pyle or Andy Warren or someone else was doing some research on, and they needed some DNA material, if it was appropriate to the nature of the population and so on. So that might turn some of you off right now. You should take a minute and let somebody leave by the back door if you want to. John and I had a wonderful productive meeting just the other day at his house with his mother's kind presence. I turned to Elizabeth at one point the other day and I said, Elizabeth, what's it like to be seeing these two dudes sitting here at this table doing the same thing you were watching them do 42 years ago together? It's pretty much her fault that we're all doing it. John and I are doing it still because she took us out for the first time into the field.
And I dedicated my book to her, so it is her fault.
That's right. Let me say that John's book, the catalog of the butterflies of the United States and Canada, was the single most important tool of the year, right up there with, well, how can you have single with something else? But my most important tools of the year were, first of all, my binoculars. Well, first of all, I guess powder milk, my automobile. My binoculars, actually the same binoculars I've used for 35 years. My nets. The Kaufman Rock Field Guide, which was reading my working Bible every day. I used my field guide too, yes, and Jeff's field guides, and I had a great traveling library. I used a lot of books. But the Kaufman Rock Field Guide was the most valuable to me. And then Pelham's catalog. To have that catalog published, when it was published, was the greatest boon that one could possibly imagine to this year. It absolved me of any taxonomic decisions. You know, if I were doing this without such stuff, I would have to decide what list am I going to use? What am I going to call a species? What about all these contested species? And that takes time and effort and energy. And then later on, there's going to be discussion about it. This way is just this. Pelham list is 800 species even. And that's what I'm going for. So I mean, John, I can't thank you enough, my friend. And many other, I know. Many other ways you've helped me too. Anyway, John has just been kind enough to examine all my voucher specimens, and delightfully, I think I didn't have very many total miss IDs, a few, but I only lost one species in the examination. And lost one other, but gained one too, so that worked out awfully nicely. And now, that list, I'll be telling you numbers later on, will be going to my certification committee, consisting of John Pelham, Andy Warren, the great lepidopterist at the McGuire Center for Lepidoptera in Gainesville, and Paul Opera, the author of the Peterson Field Guides. Those were useful to me too, of course. And then they will finally certify the final number that you'll have. So that was the MO. Another aspect about my rules and my MO was that I did admit immatures. When Sally Hughes and Charles Remington and I, with the assistants and great help of Paul Opera and Jerry Pyle and Ray Stanford, started the 4th of July butterfly counts in 1975. We included immatures as species to be counted. But that rule was changed later on. I don't know if it changed when Abbott took over the counts or prior to that, but now you can't count immatures as a species. You, of course, report them when you see them. And that to me is nonsense. The flying butterfly is 1/4 of the animal. Birders certainly count immature birds on bird counts and on figures and so on. So I deemed that if an identification could be considered certain, that I would count the immatures. And there are, I think, 3 or 4 species that I encountered solely on the basis of immatures. Lots of others I saw the immatures as well. So those were the rules that I went by, essentially, and then I went and did it. Pretty simple. As I told you, I did have competitors. They weren't human. My competitors were, and they were fierce ones. My competitors were the clock, the clouds, the cache, and the continent. I'm going to show you brief highlights from the 2 blogs that were put up. I called them anti-blogs. They're artifact-based anti-blogs. I wrote on stuff and put them in the US mail. And then they were scanned and put up on the internet by 2 organizations. Now, how many of you knew that there were 2 completely separate blogs? We just didn't get that out. Because most of you, I think, know about the one the Xerces Society had up. Some of you know about the one that the Orion Society, for whom I wrote a column for many years, had up. They're different material completely. And they were complementary. and they were built and planned in order to complement one another. Most people think they were the same. So I'm going to run through some extracts of that on the PowerPoint here. The friends and names will help me to adapt to PowerPoint to show you a few images of butterflies.
Wait a minute, Pyle's using PowerPoint?
It's
You
your
don't have a
fault.
slideshow?
Your fault, John. You know that.
Hey, then I'll take that credit right now.
Yeah, I actually should mention this, although John didn't digitize these images for me. John did an extraordinary service for me this year. Another one, yet another one, in that, you know, I have a lot of slides. Those show slides, sometimes, I guess, maybe not anymore much, but I couldn't do very many jobs during this year. But I had to do some because we had to pay the bills, and my book advance was half of what I asked for from the publisher. It was enough to either pay the bills or take the trip, and not both. So I accepted a few lectures around the country, but I couldn't do very much because if you have to be in Long Beach on a given day, and you're in Florida, well, that's what happened. Same thing with Illinois when I was in Texas, and so on and so forth. And you're driving primarily. It can be pretty limiting. So I had to turn down a neat job in Maine and a neat job in Ohio that would have added some species probably, but I just couldn't get there in the time limit. But I did agree to go to the McGuire Center for their Butterfly Fest in October. It was a plausible time to go back to Florida for butterflies, and they were paying me for some lectures. But they did not want me to show science.
Did not want you.
So Captain Bellman here actually took the time to scan hundreds of sites from and to transfer the discs to Florida. Well, the people there helped me too.
Well, let's make it clear, Bob, this was a conspiracy on the part of many people to deprive you of the opportunity to use your slides ever again.
Do you know what you people did? You stole my PowerPoint virginity.
And I see we're flogging it again tonight.
You and Jackie Miller primarily. But in any case, it worked, and so I was able to give 3 PowerPoint lectures in Florida, and I have one of them that I'm going to be giving, I guess, ID at the summer program. Is that right?
State conference, yes.
I had a job that weekend. It was actually going to pay some bills, but it was canceled. But I'm glad because Tia and I really wanted to come to Yakima, so we're happy that we're going to be
We're glad too.
Thank you. So John, thanks for doing that. And then I have another one that John helped me to do on monarchs, which in a couple of years when everybody's forgotten the program you're doing next week on monarchs, I'd come back and do that again. They won't forget about it. So the 2 blogs, I'll give you the websites later on if you want it. Well, it's easy. It's just xerces.org or Orion Society or OrionMagazine.org. But if this looks interesting to you, you can go to them and in your leisure. They're not very long. There's not a lot of words. Check them out. But for now, I want to just run through parts of them. I think they go up to about October in order to share a few images of butterflies with you before I ladle on a few statistics and a few of the other outcomes from the trip. So if I may have the lights down to some extent, especially those. Thank you. That's one. This time I'm going to do it. You're going to watch now. It's going to happen. Wow. See, it doesn't work. The slides are okay.
Point it at the laptop.
So here is the pointed at the laptop. Dave told me to point it.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Can you guys get your advice? This is the famous picture. I mean, if I showed you nothing else from the blogs, then this. This is the one I had to show you because this was the send-off. My old pal Al Wagar, one of my. By the way, did you all know? I guess it doesn't bear repeating too many times. I mean, you can't repeat it too many times. Al Wagar was on my thesis committee for watching Washington butterflies as my master's thesis at the U in 1974, and now he is one. Thing is, he's younger now, I think, than he was then. And David came down and filled the tank with powder milk, which didn't take a whole lot of gas, but it got me down the road. And thank you for doing that so much. There'll be more thanks coming later on for Waba. But that was a great send-off, and I appreciated it, gentlemen, especially coming all the way to Grays River. You know, the first couple of months were not exactly butterfly rich. They were a lot richer in banana slugs. When I turned up at Berkeley in February for an entomologist gathering that Jerry Pyle had in Berkeley, I was able to report in the first 8 weeks, or 6 weeks I guess it was, that I had seen 8 species of butterflies. So it was a tough go to start with. Buttermilk aged, I aged, look at all the years. Anyway, for a long time that was the only monarch I saw. Pardon?
You
It's
got-
heating.
It's what?
It's heating.
If you press it, really, for a long time, it'll go twice.
Okay.
Just press it once, it takes a while.
Okay, I still didn't hear the comment.
Did you actually take a picture of that and put it on there? Did you get it off the website?
Oh, I did.
Say you cheated.
Oh, cheating? Of course it's cheating. Every one of these is cheating.
Yeah.
I didn't take a single photograph. It's a postcard. It's a postcard. And most of what I used were various artifacts that I found on the road or somewhere. And I sent them in the mail. But the point here was that was the only monarch I saw for a long time. And then I finally started to get into the, oh, it was too many times,
But
John.
don't press it so hard.
You just told me to press it hard.
No, we put it on.
Okay. Oh, you
It's not a slide
did?
projector, right?
But one of the interesting things was that the eucalyptus leaves in which the monarchs overwinter in California, right? I thought we had those lights off. Those lights off, please. The leaves were all being dissected by a eucalyptus weevil, which is considered a possible concern for the monarchs that depend upon the eucalyptus. But I'm not going
Lights up there.
to go through this in that detail. I do have to say that the very first spring emergent butterfly that I found, several days into January, and it was underneath the Bixby Creek Bridge, back up the canyon. That's the canyon that Jack Kerouac lived in when he wrote his wonderful book, well, hard book, but stirring book called Big Sur. And I went up there above the place where Kerouac and the other beats had lived up in that canyon, and I found the first Pieris marginalis venosa, the wonderful veined California version of our margin white. And I finally realized, okay, there are some butterflies out there, if I am the person.
When was this?
Why is it pretty much?
What date?
Well, I'd have to look at the actual notes, Stuart, but it was in the first week of January. Finally got into decent numbers of months. No, it wasn't, I'm sorry, it was about the 10th of January. And I've got down into Santa Barbara and that area, and I was finding a few monarchs. The monarch numbers were low, but at least I finally got into monarchs. I decided to start with monarchs. I forgot to tell you that butterfly number 1, this is one of the greatest blessings of the year, one of the many grace notes that occurred. Butterfly number 1, I found on Christmas Eve in our woodshed. It was an overwintering California tortoise. And so I watched it every night. I did not, and every day I didn't put Velcro on it or Scotch tape or anything. And I went out and at midnight on New Year's, it was still there. Bingo, number 1. How cool to be able to start the Butterfly Big Year at Sweet Park in Grays River on January 1st. That was wonderful. Then it was a hell of a long time until I saw any more butterflies. But it was a good start. And by the way, when I came back from my second California trip, the very first spring azure, or echo blue, that I saw was in it's the bottom one that goes forward. That's intuitive. The very first echo blue that I had was in our backyard when I got home, so that was awfully sweet too. A number of species of animals I got my very best looks at of my whole life during these weeks. 65 sea otters that I slept 35 yards away from overnight. Bobcat walking right past me, etc., etc. But they weren't butterflies, and one starts to get a little nervous. The very first flowering desert I got into in southeastern California, almost all the way to Mexicali, was absolutely wonderful in January. But there wasn't, if you can believe it, not a butterfly to be seen in decent weather in the 60s, good sun, and I walked for hours, and not a butterfly was out there yet. Timing was everything, and timing was not always with me, as you'll hear in a little bit. I've not got the touch of this. I'm sorry about that. 40 years of carousel projectors. There must be a certain touch.
Bob, just touch it and release.
Pardon me?
Don't hold your finger down.
Then nothing happens, okay. When I got to Death Valley, these flowers, these composites were out. Death Valley looked pretty great too. It was early, but I found in one entire day of searching exactly one butterfly, and it was my first pygmy blue. So you get the point that the beginnings were slow. And then I finally made it all the way across the country to Florida. and I found a couple of butterflies in Texas on the way, and it began to pick up. But then Tia was able to meet me in Sanibel for a wonderful weekend. We went to the Everglades and shelled and had a marvelous time. But there still weren't the butterflies that one would have expected, even in Florida at that season. And yet we began to see butterflies landing on the snouts of alligators and so on and so forth. As I said, I'm the one on the right. This is a wonderful place for the silver-banded hair streak, but not until later in the year. We did see John, our first Ocola skippers here, and they were all there. That was as close as we got to Miami in the background, which is as close as anyone needs to get to Miami. Actually, I ended up in Miami several times later in the year, but that's all the farther I made Tia go to. We did see atlas, by the way, and here, that was a, do you know the atlas? David Droppers has stunning pictures of atlas in the wonderful scrapbook that Stacy made for him. If you haven't seen that scrapbook tonight, do. The atlas hair streak was once considered endangered and now has made a remarkable radiation in numbers down in Florida. It's on my ancient tight-fitting t-shirt there. But we did see it, only by virtue of the fact that Tia found the pupae of it at Fairchild Gardens. But then later I went up into, this is at the backyard of Elena Edwards, the leader of the Atala or Atala chapter of NABA. And she hosted me for a while, and I'm looking at, I'm going to go really high tech here. I'm looking at adults, larvae, and pupae all at the same time of Atalas. You're getting it right at it. No, just touch it. I didn't even breathe on it. Go back. Go back. Stunning butterfly. And you see the larvae, and to some extent the pupae. There's the larva, there's the pupa, there's the adult. They're all aposematic, warning coloration. They're highly toxic, and they advertise that with their bright colors.
Do you know what that host plant is?
Yes, it's called kunti. It's the only native cycad, I believe, in the United States.
Oh, it's maybe on cycad.
Yes. And it contains the alkaloids that they process and sequester. Am I in your way? I'm sorry.
No.
Marshall's hair streak was a nice early find, and when we found it, it was the northernmost record ever in Florida. Some species do indeed seem to be advancing north, but that wasn't happening on the west coast last spring, I can tell you that, and probably not today in the snow. That butterfly is very blue above. I think I have a photograph of it. There we go.
Wait, can you go back on that just a minute?
Sure. I'll try.
Okay, wait, with leaves like this all around, who needs paper?
Or pants.
Or hands?
Well, like fig leaves, you know.
Okay.
It is a fig. I didn't think anybody would get it. But it's not a fig. It grows near a fig. But this is actually sea grape. Beautiful, beautiful plant all along the Florida coast.
What was the advice in the...
Okay, so that's worth looking at actually. After weeks of rain and cloud and wind and parsimonious butterflies and a crisis of confidence, which I did suffer pretty badly in Lodi, California, in heavy rain when I realized I had an oil leak and my butt was petrified and I was tired and I was driving to Florida in time to meet Tia to fly down there. I had that crisis of confidence in Lodi that night in the heavy, heavy rain. Stuck in Lodi, don't you know? Too. I received this advice in a fortune cookie, no lie. Do not give up. The beginning is always the hardest. No lie. Probably helped. The female on the left and the male on the right, Elena Edwards, wonderful photographs of the Marshall's hair streak. It would be months and months until we finally found its close relative, the Bartram's hair streak in the Everglades. Snakes and swallowtails in the Kissimmee Prairie State Preserve. If you ever go to Florida, almost any season, go to Kissimmee. I had two of the finest butterfly days of the year there. The autumn day, there were loamy dusted skippers all over the place, with lots of rare skippers and swallowtails and others. I was there with Buck and Linda Cooper, who were two of the greatest butterflies you'll ever meet. And of course, by the way, I was with NABA people in preserves a good deal of the time, and I certainly didn't use my nets when it was not appropriate or welcome by my companions. Oh, I did go to Graceland. I wanted to see if there were any butterflies in Graceland. Turns out they charge a lot of money to go on tours even to get in, but I persevered and discovered that there's a free hour to visit Elvis's tomb and pay your respects between 7:30 and 8:30 in the morning. So I went and did not see any butterflies except for a nice butterfly graffito that someone had drawn outside the wall.
About what date are we now?
Thank you. By the way, on my way to Graceland, the day before that, I don't have any photographs of this, I had one of the most wonderful grace notes, of which I often speak, and that was coming up through Georgia. This is early April, Stuart, early April, and I'm on the Tennessee River, and I thought I had missed out on the West Virginia white, a butterfly I especially wanted to see all my life, because when I was going to go see it in New England, the weather was terrible. And I found both the West Virginia white and the falcate orange tip flying on beautiful limestone benches in the spring wildflowers above the Tennessee River, just by sniffing around. I'll mention this point, by the way. I guess I could have a more suitable picture too. Let's find a butterfly. You know, this is a strategy point. You probably will maximize your number of butterflies if you have people to go with all the time who know those butterflies in each given place. And I certainly took advantage of that. However, it's a very different kind of a trip if you do that. And one wants to spend a certain amount of time ferreting around by oneself. I wanted this trip to be at least as much based on my knowledge over the years built up, my research, and my sense of appropriateness of landscape and what I know about these butterflies. I wanted hunch to be as important as a setup. And with some of these things, you go with a certain person, it's a setup, and there's nothing wrong with a setup. Birders call it a stakeout. And that's fine, go see the staked out bird, that's cool. But to find it, like those two butterflies on the edge of the Tennessee River when you had no idea and you were in the very southernmost end of the range of that butterfly, oh, that was heavenly. So I did at least as much of the butterflying based on my intuition and my sense of putting everything together, and undoubtedly saw fewer species because of it. But probably had more fun. But other times I went with people. So for example, Liam O'Brien, who's a wonderful butterflyer in San Francisco, an artist, is conducting this program to link together all these urban little bits of habitat in the Sunset District of San Francisco to save the habitat of the once considered extinct green hair streak that occurs there. And it's a big, beautiful green hair streak right in the city, in view of the Golden Gate Bridge. And I went out with him on a field trip and saw the people's joy at seeing that butterfly. And that was, of course, rich too. So and then to go the next day to Mrs. Hallberg's Butterfly Gardens, 94-year-old Louise Hallberg, who still hosts hundreds and hundreds of school kids a year at her butterfly garden in Sebastopol to see some things with her. I mean, it's a trade-off to be with people or by yourself. And of course, by that time, the person I really wanted to be with was Tia more than anyone, and it was awfully good to get back home. And every time I got back home, it was good. Now, I will say that my plan was to conduct my travels like one half of a daisy, since we live in the middle up here, and I wasn't going into the ocean. So, in other words, I was looping out from Grays River, back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth. So, heck of a lot of miles. By the way, this is maybe the only view you'll get of how I arranged the front seat of my little tiny Honda into a bed.
Are you still sleeping behind the steering wheel, or do you move?
No, I slept behind the steering wheel only when I felt unsafe or insecure. But if I felt secure, I actually have a completely prone bed, believe it or not, and slept well in it. But more about sleep later. Anyway, that was the best bed always getting home to. Gee.
How many miles do you have on Powderville now?
Oh, do you mind if I wait till the statistical section to do that?
Statistics, yeah.
It was fun. I have to say it was fun finding the materials for the anti-blog. It was a pain in the butt actually doing it and sending it and mailing it because it took a lot of time, and I know I lost species by not being ready to mail it and spending too much time doing so.
Hey Bob, can I ask you a question?
But I think it was worth it. Yes, John?
That last picture there.
Yes, sir.
What did you have to do to make that paper look so rich? And where did you find that piece of paper to write on?
On the ground in
At Birchmark?
Connecticut, at a nature reserve in Connecticut.
That is Birchmark.
Yes,
Okay,
Betula.
well, I think that was probably worth saying, you know, like, I didn't know that. It looked to me otherwise like somebody burned it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Betula papyrifera.
You know, how about the moth? Was that like a?
Quick County roadkill.
Okay.
Roadkill.
I often use roadkills.
Actually, it was in Razor, it says so right
Oh, why did I think it's?
Did you count roadkills as a separate category?
I can't click at that from. Oh, it says Grazer or Waukegan County. Why did I say click that? Pardon me.
Did you count roadkill in a separate category?
Yes, I recorded almost everything that I saw, full stop, and certainly the roadkill. But I did not count them as species. If I, there were none that I found solely as roadkill. But if I had, I would not have counted them as a species. I certainly would have recorded the information. But this was what a lot of the weather was like. And not just in January and February. This is in May in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, where there were supposed to be lots of Hessel's hair streaks and things. And by the way, the next day it got sunny and we did see Hessel's hair streak and the cobweb skipper and some other wonderful butterflies. But it was just the luck of the draw whether I got to a particular habitat in that kind of weather or in this kind of weather, which was the next day. You recognize the shirt, Heidi?
Yeah.
Heidi's wonderful photograph of the Indra Swallowtail transferred onto one of the early shirts for this organization, right? Wasn't it the first?
It was the first one.
After 4 months in the field, I could fit into it again. Pine snake in the Pine Barrens.
Is that a pine snake?
Yes. Do you want me to
King
go?
snake?
No, it's a pine snake for sure.
Any relation to a gopher?
Cool.
Had a major New Jersey herpetologist
Yeah,
with us.
yeah.
Pardon me,
Any
sir.
relation to a gopher snake?
It's in the same family as the gopher snake,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, the Anaphid or something like
Same
that.
genus. Ritual.
That's it. And I don't know the noctude, but it was mighty birdie.
Euclidia custodia.
You know that?
Yeah.
You're awesome, dude.
No, it looks like a skipper, so I don't know what it was.
And this really looks like a skipper. It's an uncommon species, and I was awfully pleased. This was a lifer for me. I don't have that statistic yet. I don't yet know. I forgot to add up how many life butterflies I saw this year, but it was significant. It's always fun to be out with the watchers, isn't it? And the guy on the right is really something. He's Will Curling. He did a lot of butterfly work in Montana, and then his wife wanted to move back east, and he was disheartened at first, but he's become a major butterflyer in Connecticut, and he tries to see butterflies as many days out of the year as he can. And he sees them on extraordinary, terrible days.
Including all the stages.
No adults. He looks for immatures, but he means to see butterflies flying. Thank you for specifying. So this was the great hope there in New Jersey, was the Hessel's hair streak, which is so similar in appearance really to the olive hair streak type of what we now call the cedar hair streak, big sort of super species. But this one is a specialist on white cedar, in the white cedar bogs of the East Coast, and very much contracted in its range from what it used to be, but not utterly uncommon in some cases, quite a charmer. So it was very special when I got someplace in the city right there. By the way, I based my plan on what I called grail species. I mean, you've got 800 species. You've got millions of square miles. And how are you going, is that right? Hundreds of thousands, what's the order of magnitude? Anyway, a lot of land. And how are you going to possibly organize your time and your travel? It's very intimidating. And so I thought, if I adopt a certain number of what I call grail species, grails that I have either always wanted to see and never have, or have very seldom seen and would like to see better, and go for those, then I ought to be able to pick up most of the more common species along the way. And that was really my MO. And it worked reasonably well. I'll give you more on that in a little bit. One of them was this Thorn's hair streak. I had the extraordinary experience of seeing perhaps the 3 most narrowly endemic full species of butterflies, if they continue to be recognized as such, in the United States in 2 days. Through the help of a fellow named Kojiro, who took me out in San Diego County to see Thorn's hair streak, which is only on the Tecate cypress in a very narrow part of San Diego County, heavily in danger of fire. not even over in the Mexico side, I don't believe. And then the next day we saw, or the day before that, I guess we saw the, do I have it here? I hope I have it, I don't know. I think I should have a picture of it. Oh, there's Koji and Mike. And Koji's a wonderful butterfly rearer in San Diego. He's gone back to Japan for a while. He hopes to come back. And then Mike Klein has made a specialty of studying and protecting. Oh, don't I have the picture?
Well, what was that neck ring on that,
There it is. Oh, the hair streak?
thorn on it,
It
yeah?
was nectaring on a species of vaccinium.
Oh, vaccinium?
No, I'm sorry.
See, no,
I didn't mean that. I meant, no, neither. It's manzanita.
manzanita.
It was a manzanita.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. This is what I was hoping I had a picture of. Here, nectaring on this, isn't that an Ariagonum? Isn't that a Gnome? Looks like an Ariagonum. But the butterfly doesn't feed on that. Or does it? What's a host of
No,
hermits?
it's a buckthorn, and ramblers.
That's right, of course it is. It's on the ramus there. Related to our cascara. This is one of the sweetest butterflies in North America. Little-tailed copper, one of only two coppers with tails. Tiny thing, beautiful yellow beanie. I mean, a bright yellow, and it's just sweet. And it's also extremely narrowly limited to a little bit of Baja, a little bit of San Diego County, and much of its habitat has been burnt in recent years. It's in great danger. Probably the most, I think it's the most endangered full species of butterfly in North America. It's not listed. And Xerxes should probably petition for that. But it was wonderful to see. So I saw those two, and then I returned to, I don't have a picture of it because I was there by myself, but I returned to Santa Catalina Island for my second time. My first time didn't work, and I went back and I hiked miles and miles and miles and miles up to the central ridge of the island, and to look for a butterfly, not the gray hair streak, but one that looks rather like it with very much subdued markings. And it is, again, one of the most narrowly endemic butterflies in the world. It's a full species, not that closely related to the gray hair streak, as it turns out now, that occurs solely on Catalina Island, none of the other Channel Islands this time.
Well, after examining those specimens, it was quite clear. There was a concern that it was going to get swamped out by the gray hair
Right.
streak because they were considered to be so closely related. But now I can see there is no threat because they're asking different species groups that are not really that closely related.
That's why I was so eager for you to see those, because once you actually see that animal, they were abundant, by the way. When I finally got up there, I'd spent, you have to take this long, for you know the song, 26 miles there across the sea, Santa Catalina. So you have to take this 26-mile ferry ride. You don't have that much time, and I walked all day the first time I went there in April, never found it, and then I realized I had to get above where the fires had been, above where the cities, the small town had knocked out the previous habitat. Walked my buns off that day, and then I went out these little ridges out to the west side of the island, overlooking these extraordinary azure bays, and here they were, the males posting all over these various species of shrubs. It was wonderful. I missed my ferry. I jogged the last couple miles back. I still miss my ferry. I had to take the last ferry off the island to a different town from where my car was, take a cab to my car, and drive all night to Santa Barbara to get to a person's PhD thesis committee meeting that paid for my trip down.
The butterfly you
That's
mentioned,
kind of how the whole year was. Pardon?
the butterfly species on Santa Catalina was?
Thank you, Stuart. Strymon avalona. Yeah, I guess I do have a picture of it, sort of. You see how much more subtle the markings are than on the gray hair streak. Strymon avalona, named for the town of Avalon. Completely endemic species on this one island in California, and in pretty good shape because most of the interior of the island, thanks to, who was the magnate? Wrigley, of course, thank you. Oh, who knew that? Well done.
Los Angeles.
Good for you, yeah. Mr. Wrigley, the gum man, saved most of the interior of the island. It's down by the Santa Catalina Conservancy, and it's very close to LA, you know, really to
It's got a lot of other neat butterflies.
a lot of endemics, yeah.
Host plant is?
I'll get back to you on that. Too much marshaling, too much information. I'm not thinking of the host right now. I want to get through this so I can tell you a few interesting facts. We used whatever was at hand, beer mats. Where would I get a beer mat? Where would I get a bar mat? Well, I'll tell you, when I got back to that ferry, I mean, the last ferry off the island, I've never been happier for a Heineken, and that's not even one of my favorite beers. That was that was the height. It was extensive. One of my 2 most rigorous hikes of the year. Then I went to the Arctic Circle and beyond. Did you know you can drive to the North Slope? You can drive to Anwar. Did you know that? You just have to lie to the rental car company. You have to, none of them will let you unless you buy some gigantovore vehicle. It costs $1 billion a foot to drive it. You rent these relatively cheap little Fords that are just fine for the haul road, which is a perfectly good road. You just need to slow down when you meet those trucks and kind of pull over. And then they slow down and they're perfectly nice. But if you go fast past them, they will speed up and then the rocks destroy your windshield. So I had no problem with whatever. And I drove all the way to the North Slope, all the way to Anwar, and almost all the way to the Arctic Ocean. You can't quite get to the Arctic Ocean. They won't let you do that without taking a tour. But you can do that. I only had 10 days in Alaska.
When was that one?
This was in June, and Ken, oh man, timing? Can you imagine timing? In fact, Ken Phillip, the director of the Alaska Lepidoptera Survey, kept saying, Bob, you gotta go early. Alaska's early, everything's melting, the villages are falling into the Yukon River, and they are, and I saw that. Butterflies are earlier and earlier. Don't come in July. A lot of them won't be done. And some would be out then, like out Toledo, but come in June. So I booked it in June, and then he said, Bob, it's too early. And then, by the way, you know these birding big ears, they fly everywhere, and that's the way they get so many species. I couldn't do that. I flew 6 or 8 trips, and every single one was frequent flyer or else paid for by a job I did or something. I never bought an airline ticket. So I had booked frequent flyer tickets to Alaska, and fortunately was able to change them by a week. And the fact that I was able to put it back by a week enabled me to go down to California to this faculty meeting, this person's committee I'm on, that was paid for, and to see those 3 endemics. So it worked out really well. But when I got to Alaska, is the weather going to be any good? And in fact, I had 3 days that were absolutely crappy, which I saw virtually nothing, including Eagle Summit, where I'd wanted to go for many, many years. But I also had days like this, and I got to see the outhouse of the midnight sun. It's the last public loo on the way north. So don't hold it past that. And this was at Galbraith Lake where Ken Phillip urged me to go, and in fact later he showed up there of all things, running into Lepidopterus in the field, and we were able to butterfly together. But this is where I had wonderful rare species of alpines like Eurybia fasciata, the banded alpine, and Ross's alpine, and other wonderful butterflies. And had pretty good, adequate weather. This one was camping there with her husband, and this is these very dark little silvery blues that look like you smudged them on an ink pad, and that was on there. But what a great joy to finally realize being up in the wild Arctic tundra right outside of Anwar with these splendid butterflies and decent weather. And you know
Any
what?
bugs? Any bugs biting?
Not bad at all there. The weather closed in after I left Alaska. On the solstice, I was in Fairbanks. And Fairbanks is one giant party. It's like Carnival on the solstice. Everybody's in bikini tops and not thongs, but close. And I mean, you think you're in Laguna Beach or something. It does not look like Fairbanks. But apparently the day, and it was 88 degrees at 11 o'clock in the solstice. But the day after that, the weather closed in, and apparently it was a really bad butterfly summer in Alaska after that. So in that case, I was extremely fortunate. Very rare butterfly in Washington, the Freya fritillary. Very common butterfly in Alaska. And here we are. And Dave didn't give you much background on this occasion, but this was one of the single most delightful days of the entire year. I'd gone to Slate Peak. We had health crises in the family during the years, as many of you are aware. And so I was home as much as I could. Tia was well enough that she kicked me out of the house and said, get out there in the field. And I was going to go to Wisconsin or something, but instead I did the Cascades better than I otherwise would have done. And I went up to Slate Peak, and I saw a guy down on the rocks. With a net and with binoculars and so on, and I thought, that's either Dana Vasali or Dave Nunnally. And then we got a little closer and saw the field marks, I knew it was Sir Dave. So he didn't even see me coming down because he was so intent on looking for the larvae of the Arctic blue, which also feeds on the same saxifrage. And I kind of came up behind him, how you doing, Dave? He totally freaked him out. And then we had the most delightful time watching Astarte, and then it came and landed on the Arctic. I might have been wrong about seeing a nectar on the saxifrage, Dave. I might have been wrong about that. And I was able to net that one and photograph it up close, and then we put it back on the Arnica when we released it, and Dave photographed it there. And wouldn't you think, I shouldn't give your secret away, Dave, wouldn't you think that was a mountain? It's a rock.
Hey, Bob, tell me though, doesn't it look like you'd like to eat that thing?
Oh, yeah. Well, I did. I mean, I was gobbling it up, man. I was so happy. I've seen it once before, but not well, and this was the first really good time. And then Dave not only did that, but then we went out and found, by the way, the 2 days before that, I'd been in the Olympics for the Olympic butterflies. I have never walked all over the Hurricane Ridge area and seen 0 butterflies. I found one spirea, one Atlantis fritillary, Zerini fritillary larva, John found probably from the description, crossing the trail. Not one butterfly had about 45 minutes of sun, beautiful flowers. This is in July, not one. So I missed the common branded skipper. And I missed the Villers Alpine. There's no way I was going to go through this year without seeing the Villers Alpine, one of my favorite butterflies. So Dave and I went back down to the meadow at Hart's Pass and tromped about 6 o'clock at night, wasn't it, Dave?
Yeah.
And finally, Villers Alpine.
Scared one up, huh?
Scared one up. It was wonderful. And then Dave took me down to Mazama, housed me in a wonderful room, and bought me a wonderful dinner. So Dave, you're the man. What a gentleman. What a gentleman. He was one of the most delightful grace notes. There's the Olympics that are supposed to have butterflies. Oh, and another delightful day, 4th of July, I got to spend with my family. And these are my grandchildren, all 3 of them. And I guess Tia took the picture, so sadly she's not in it. And Tom's beautiful wife, Eliana, is not in the picture. They have recently moved down to Guadalajara, where her family is, which breaks our hearts to have them so far away. But this is my grandson, David, and my granddaughter, Christina, and my grandson, Francis. And that's my stepson, Tom. We had a wonderful day at Mount St. Helens, and we were hoping to find the snowberry checker spot, but in fact it was cloudy and cold. We did find ochre ringlets, and that was quite adequate. We had a really good time chasing them with the kids, so that was fun. Oh, there we go, did it bad again. I'm so bad.
Oh, wait, wait.
Just want to see the kids again.
Yeah, I did. That's what it was like up there, by the way. The penstemon was everywhere and should have been full of euphidias and things, but it wasn't.
Except they feed on snowberry, right?
Yeah, that one does, but the Edith is up there.
They don't feed on penstemons either.
Well, well, I think you might be mistaken because the biologist up there, John, feel that the Editha has, in fact, I saw it when I was up there. If it was Editha, had actually eaten away a whole lot of the penstemon Barrettii. I'll tell you, we'll talk about it. There is a euphidias using a whole lot of penstemon up there. So I camped there many years ago, and I camped there again this time.
You thought you helped build it.
What's that?
Did you help build it, huh?
Yeah, I did. That was earlier. I went down to the Pacific Slope meeting of the Lepidopterist Society in Northern California and find time in the field with them, but then I shot on to Yosemite, and this was one of my main grail butterflies. All my life I wanted to see the green bear's sulfur that is endemic to the central alpine Yosemite Sierra Nevada area. Nowhere else in the world, and no other butterfly very close to it at all. I mean, a real true species endemic. And they were abundant right at Tioga Pass, so I was happier than I can tell you. these, I didn't collect these, this photograph came from the Butterflies of America website. Then back to the Midwest. Several times I was hoping to get up into the northern Midwest, but the weather blanked me out every time, and so I went out in the field. I taught a butterfly course back there, and by the way, that hackberry butterfly really did land on, that's a tawny emperor, and it really did land on the correct field guide page. I didn't put it there.
Come on, how long did you have to wait for that?
It just happened. So I had a paying gig there doing a butterfly walk, but the cat on the right there is a wonderful lepidopterist by the name of Jim Weicker. And I ended up going in the field with him for several days, both at that time of year and then again in October, or August, I guess, and saw some, there we are, saw some very, very, very special skippers, especially in the sedge marshes of Illinois. Wild hops, and by the way, Jim Weicker is a specialist on the moths called the papapimas. And the papapimas are pretty noctuid moths whose larvae burrow into the rootstocks of various species of plants. And Jim knows them well, and he can look at the plant, and he can say that ironweed, or that lead plant, or that hop, or that reed canary grass has papapima larvae in the base. And he'll pull them, and they're always there. And he's learned that he can rear them all on carrots by boring a hole in carrot. So he can rear any of them. Pardon?
The actual carrot.
Yeah, the actual carrot. I mean, what a wonderful thing for a person who's raising all these different moths. So he's done wonderful biology on them. And he said there was going to be a caterpillar in this hop plant, and when he peeled it, there was the larva right there. I swear that Jim Weicker could pull a papapima larva out of a garden hose. So I was having fun in the field with various people, got back to Colorado and all over the place. And oh, by the way I found Jim's campsite was the traditional way with the paper plate. He didn't write all that stuff on the bottom, just the stuff. Oh. One of the greatest days and one of the most uncomfortable days of my life. Jim took me, this is not in Brazil, this is not in Costa Rica, this is in Illinois, this is down by Cairo, where the Ohio and Mississippi come together, and it, as Charlie Cavell has told me for years, is subtropical there. And we went into the cane breaks looking for some of the cane butterflies. There's cane-feeding lacewing roadside skipper, and there's 2 species of cane-feeding pearly eyes, and the other pearly eye doesn't feed on cane is there too. All 3 species of these elegant, nacreous, purple and tan and honey-colored butterflies, pinkish, live together in this one tiny little area of southern Illinois. And we saw all 3 pearly eyes on the base of one tree sucking sap at the same time. And Jim said, I'm so glad you saw this because I've seen this before and nobody would believe me. And we did, and we confirmed them all. And I had an astonishing time. Then I got back to his trailer and I almost died. I had over 200 chiggers on my thighs and groin and waist and arm, everything. You don't know chiggers, try to stay that way. And I had hundreds of chiggers and hundreds of ticks all year and exactly 1 fire ant. So I learned to avoid fire ants, but the chiggers and ticks took their share of Pyle this year, I'll tell you that. One of the greatest spectacles of the year was seeing the regal fritillaries. It was one of my grails, of course. Saw 1, saw 2, and then we went to a habitat where there were hundreds of regal fritillaries on the wing, nectaring on the milkweed. It's a species that suffered a lot from overzealous burning of TNC and DNR habitats in the Midwest. So you have to go to an area that hasn't been burned in recent years. And then, of course, another grail was the Diana fritillary, with its spectacular Halloween orange and black male and its mimic female that is part of the mimicry guild, mimicking the pipevine swallowtail, which is toxic, as you know, from feeding on Dutchman's pipe, or at least highly unpalatable to birds. And there's a whole guild, our most complicated mimicry ring in the country, of several species of swallowtails whose females, including the eastern tiger swallowtail, has a black and blue morph that's common where this butterfly, where the pipevine occurs. Red spotted purple and others. And the female Diana males mimicking monarchs and females mimicking pythons. That's a darn good idea. Can I borrow that?
Absolutely.
That, by the way, of course, is Asclepias tuberosa, the butterfly weed. Wonderful nectar plant. And the third of the fritillary grail team was Nokomis. This is actually my only photograph. This is one of my only photographs in this entire line show, because this is one you scanned, John, for me. And I photographed this in Utah years ago, but this is the Nokomis fritillary, the biggest of our western fritillaries. And it's restricted to desert seep situations in the desert southwest. It doesn't get north of about Vernal, Utah. And in fact, it's very near Vernal, Utah in the Dinosaur National Park, where I found it this year and was able to see it pretty well. Only males, the females weren't on it. But it's a stunning fritillary. So I got all three of my fritillary grails. I also saw dinosaurs, at least small ones.
Did you see that lizard?
Birds.
Did you get to see that lizard?
Yes, thank you. And this actually, funnily enough, this was actually almost sort of a fourth grail fritillary. It's more common than the others, but it's almost as big. It's a huge fritillary of Colorado and points east, but not too far east, called the Edwards fritillary. One of the only fritillaries in North America that has no subspecies named, because it's not very variable. Splendid big thing. Janet Chu has been a great supporter of Xerces and our family for many, many years. She has monitored the butterflies of Boulder County for a long time. And here we are at the site of the thunder tree. You've got that book with you, David, the thunder tree. That was the tree on the canal where I started being a butterflyer 50 years ago this year. At the site of that tree. The tree's gone now, but the trees around it are there, and the site's still there. And that's where we always start our butterfly count every year at the hollow tree. One of my favorite butterflies, as many of you know, is the Magdalena alpine. And I photographed, or actually I guess her mom photographed Amy with this Magdalena on her nose this year. But we also photographed Amy with the Magdalena on her nose about 30 years ago, so that was fun. It was nice of them to reserve that place for me. I never found out what it was that they had reserved for me. But and then a great day with Boyce Drummond, one of our splendid lepidopterists who does surveying on some endangered species in Colorado. We went out and we found the Meade's wood nymph, which is a sweet little wood nymph with red on the wings. Little in Colorado, but John, were you amazed by that New Mexico subspecies?
No, that's what you see.
Those things are huge.
Thanks.
But what Boyce was taking us out to see, particularly to look for, was this federally endangered species called the Pawnee montane skipper.
That sure looks like a clothes to me.
Yeah, I know. If we saw it here, we'd think so, wouldn't we? Didn't think it was a regular woodland skipper, but it happens to be one of the most endangered butterflies in the country, which is not solely responsible, but very much implicated in stopping a huge dam that would have devastated a canyon west of Denver. Everybody's glad now they didn't build it. My mother and I stayed in that cabin in 1964, and Joanna and I had our honeymoon there in 1966. And I went there to stay with Amy and her daughter this year, and the same woman was still running the lodge. I swear, I promise. Nice one, 94 years old. I won't say she remembered me, but I did find the registry books. And that's in the Beta, Colorado, which is the type locality of the Meade's wood nymph, and that's why we went there. My mother and I found it there all those years ago. We found it there this time too. And then Scott Black, bless his heart, the director of the Xerces Society, said, "You're doing all this stuff for Xerces." I'll tell you why in just a minute. I'm about finished pretty quickly here. We want to do something for you, and of course Xerces, nobody paid me to do this. And the money I was raising was going to Xerces, but they said, we want to do one thing. Scott's got to go to Colorado, fly to Colorado with Scott, and let's go up to the top of Mount Uncompahgre and find the Uncompahgre fritillary, which Scott and I have talked about doing for years. So we did. I flew to Colorado with Scott Black, the director of Xerces. We went to this TNC preserve where I found the Uncas skipper, and then on to Mount Uncompahgre. We started at 8,500 feet, which was somewhere down there near Lake City, Colorado, and where we finished was in the basin back behind this mountain, back in there. We climbed over 3,000 vertical feet. And we saw many species of butterflies, 19 of which were new to me for the trip that day. It was an absolutely wonderful day. And you can see I'm eating fritillaries again. I got a thing for eating Bolorias, John.
Okay.
Get in trouble for this one. It's federally endangered, of course, and it landed on its own accord. We didn't touch it. Scott made me put my net away at least a mile before we even got there. Not because he was afraid I was going to catch it. He didn't want anybody to see us with nets up there. That'd be a great headline. Xerces Society collects out the uncompahgre fiddle. But that butterfly landed on one of the tags that the researchers were using to do studies of their fruit plants up there, which are not violets. They feed on a prostrate willow called snow willow, Salix nivalis. How splendid. That was a true gray on, of course, life butterfly. I don't know if I'll ever go back there.
What's its name?
Uncompahgre fritillary, which is from, it's a Ute Indian name. The Uncompahgre is the name of, not that mountain, but the mountain nearby, and it was the name, I don't know if it was the name of one of the chiefs.
Belorio compadre?
No, its real name is Valoria improba acronema.
Yes.
Beloria?
Boloria, it's in the same
No,
genus.
no.
Valoria.
I got the Beloria part.
Improba
Improba
acronema.
acrocnema.
Yeah,
Thank you.
improba is another one of those holarctic butterflies, from both hemispheres.
It was discovered, one of the most recently discovered full species of butterflies in temperate U.S. and by Larry Gall and Felix Sperling, and they named it a new species, acrocnema, which has both a pun and it's got 2 or 3 word games in that name. But then it was decided that it was almost certainly conspecific with Beloria improba, the dingy fritillary. So now our property should be called the dingy fritillary instead of the Uncompahgre fritillary.
You can call it what you want. There's no rules.
Gillette's checker spot's one I've always wanted to see, and I've always been blanked on. I consider it mythical. And finally, I got to see it in Gothic, Colorado, which is outside of its natural range, its native range, because Paul Ehrlich years ago introduced it to the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab. Naughty, but he was trying to see if it was excluded from the southern Rockies biogeographically or ecologically by the Red Desert, and it has taken there, so it must have been a biogeographical exclusion. I don't suppose he would do that now. It's been many, many years ago. But it's been taking over about a dozen butterflies a year, 20, 30 for a long time. And I called Carol Boggs, who does research at the laboratory there, as I have off and on over the years. And I said, Carol, how's the Gillette's checker spot doing? Because I don't think I'm going to be able to find it in the northern Rockies. In fact, when I went to its habitat, it was too late. And she said, well, Bob, there were 7,000 this year. So that's where Scott and I went and got to see
Hey,
it.
Bob,
Yes, sir.
is this the early guy, same guy that tried to wipe out that colony in Stanford, Jasper Ridge?
Well, that's not quite how it actually went.
I know, it's the same guy. He was unsuccessful with that one.
He's been one of the most important conservationists in American history. He was on Johnny Carson 39 times for him. But he's also iconoclastic, and he's done some things that some people have wondered about. This was the most fun day of the year. Dia and I got to, and isn't she cute in a hard hat? You're wearing a lot of hats these days, Dia. We're going to have to get you one of those again. We got to go up with Dave McCorkle, the great lepidopterist. And by the way, John, I saw an article from the Seattle Times rotogravure yesterday that David Branch had in 1961 called Washington Butterflies, with a front cover that Dan Carney and Dave McCorkle had put together. I'd never seen it before. It's got a picture of Dave McCorkle in 1961.
No kidding.
Yeah, amazing.
Yes, little kid Freckles back then, wasn't he?
Yeah, he still looks like a little kid. Dave's one of the great Northwest, and one of the earliest butterfly conservationists. And we got to go up in the canopy crane, which if you don't know, out near Carson, was put there to study the canopy of the old growth forest, and we got to go up to look for the larvae of the Johnson's hair streak. Yo bug, man. David's made some remarkable discoveries of Johnson's hair streak lately. But we did not find it when I went to look for it near Lake Cushman. The weather was horrible, of course. And so we went up there, we found eggs, back to the lab. Some of them were live with larvae in them, and they're being reared now. So got the Johnson's hair streak in the most remarkable way in the end. And it was such fun. Yes, David.
They've got the pupa now.
Oh, from that same bunch? Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you for telling me
I got
that.
the place to release them.
Although, I'm certainly releasing it in the same place, actually. But that was, can you imagine, and I'm so glad that Tia got to go along with that. She wasn't sure she was going to go up there. But once I got her in the full body harness and the hard hat,
And there, that's what we did. We looked in the bunches of the dwarf mistletoe. We're 150 feet up here. We're looking at the bunches of dwarf mistletoe. Very cool. There's the animal. Dave's picture from years ago.
On the host.
Dave Droppers may be one of only 3 or 4 people in the room who have actually seen that butterfly alive. Not to mention,
Several of us found it on the Guava trip last year.
several were on it. It was a walking trip, and the others got to see it. Oh, that's very good. Then I went up to Maine. I was gonna have to skip New England. I went there once in May, but the weather was bad. But then I got an offer to come up to Maine to do something quick, and it was paid for, and so I did. And I hopped up to this bog in northern Maine and got to find the wonderful endemic Dorcas copper up there, Clayton's copper. Endangered, lives in a very small area, and it's pretty much my sole real New England butterfly of the year, but at least New England wasn't omitted as Canada was, ultimately. I just couldn't do Canada in the end for various reasons. Border issues. They see a net in your car at the border. John Shepard tells us they might detain you for an hour or two. We don't have time for this story, really. I was on my way back to the desert in the fall, and I went to Malheur, and I slept overnight in Malheur, and I was calling Tia in the morning, and in one of the last telephone booths in the world, and certainly one of the most nicely situated in the middle of Malheur by the French Glen Hotel in Oregon. And I look across the street and hear 2 dear friends of mine walking down the road. Hey Ruth, hey Rick, how you doing? And they look over. No, it was too late in the year to go up Steve's Mountain. If I'd been there a month or 6 weeks earlier, there would have been some wonderful butterflies to see. But at this time, I would have seen butterflies still, but not species I didn't have probably. Besides, I was real eager to get down to Arizona. Havasu, a strange place. I was looking for Wright's metal marks along the Colorado River near Lake Havasu, and found some stuff. And went on over east into the mountains of Arizona. We're getting into the fall now already, and then up into the Huachuca Mountains, where we were looking for giant skippers. And Priscilla here is pointing out the food plant, agave, of one of the giant skippers that occurs solely in the Huachuca Mountains, and there it is. Not many people get to see giant skippers, and I was terribly lucky to see 4 of them this year, if my committee approves them. One was a flyby, and one was an egg. I found a whole day of searching in ticks, fire ants, yucca, and 100 degrees, and found 14 eggs, and finally the 14th one was alive. This was hard work this year. So I'm coming across Arizona for the last time to the east, finding some unusual skippers. Snout butterflies were starting to appear in large numbers. You know, they can migrate or emigrate by billions. And I have to say, I worked the borders a lot, and I never saw this species, and I never saw any of the extraordinarily, well, I saw some pretty rare border crossers, but I didn't see any new ones for new U.S. records, and I didn't see any of the ones that have been seen maybe only once or twice, but I certainly saw a decent array of the very uncommon Texas and Arizona border butterflies. And I spent quite a bit of time down there.
And that last one was,
I'm sorry, it's not a cattle heart, that's a butterfly called the pink spotted swallowtail Papilio Anchicides. Thank you, John. And by the way, Tia took that photograph, and it landed there on its own accord, on that lower board. Pretty nice little juxtaposition. So I spent 3 different periods in...
Pink and black, the warning coloration, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I spent 3, it thinks that it's all pink. It doesn't know it's only a couple of spots. So I spent 3 different periods in the lower Rio Grande Valley, and extensive periods, and then finally went off to Florida once again. And I think that's the end, because that's as far as the blog went when we put this together. Now let me have just a very few more minutes to give you a couple of these statistics, if you'd like to. Have the lights on, please. If you'd like to visit the blog sometime and see the last 3 months, there was some fun stuff in Hawaii. Tia and I went to Hawaii for 10 days and saw 14 of the 17 Hawaiian butterflies, one of the 2 endemics. And then I finished up in the Florida Keys at the very end of the year. And New Year's Eve was in Key West. And What can I say? Strange. I saw a mystery butterfly on January 31st, December 31st, that I did not know what it was. And I actually kind of think I know what it is, but John says don't ever tell anybody. They'll never believe anything that you say about what you saw this year. So I won't. Even though he's out of it. It was a dramatic nymphalid. It wasn't in the most field guides, and I didn't see it well enough. It was across the street in Key West, and by the time I got over to the field where it was, it flew in front of me. I saw it, and then it took off over a building, and it was gone. That's one I really wish I'd been able to naturally to see it first. And I think it might have been a new Florida record, but certainly not going to try and count. So, would you like to hear a couple of the funny statistics?
Yep.
Well, you know it was a butterfly-a-thon, right? I know a number of you pledged. And if you didn't, I still have forms. And this is the last opportunity anybody will ever have to join the butterfly-a-thon. Every penny of it goes to butterfly conservation projects of the Xerces Society. You know what I mean? And I really wanted to raise more than $40,000 because that's what Andy Warren raised by auctioning the naming rights of the new owl butterfly that he discovered. And we raised $47,500. There were 360 pledgees and over 100 people who just made donations. And the overhead for the entire project, I learned from Sean at Xerces today, was less than $4,000. That was all the running the blog, that was all the mailings, that was the staff time for the people who helped me with the blog and all the mailings and all that. So over 40,000 cleared for conservation. So I was very pleased about that. That was one of the main reasons I wanted to do this.
Mileage on the car, man, we don't know.
I beg your pardon?
Mileage.
Yeah, that's the most interesting one. I drove Powder Milk 33,000 miles. I drove rental cars probably between another 5 and 10. I haven't added it up yet. I drove Powder Milk 33,000. Powder Milk has 388,000 miles on it. You know, Powder Milk, like Powder Milk biscuits, give you the strength to get up and do what needs to be done and all that. I drove Powder Milk, and I was listening to Garrison Keeler the first time I ever drove it when I bought it. That's why I named it Powder Milk. Bought it new in 1982 for $5,000. All of the repairs and anything I had to do during the year, I did a little bit in advance of that, where it came to 1,100 and that counted tires and oil changes and new struts I had to get. Needed the new struts because they were out, and every time I hit a pothole or anything like that, the car's fishtailed. And I'm driving through Reno in the middle of the night, and this policewoman pulls me over. I had a lot of encounters with police, always cordial. Usually because I was driving too slow and they wondered about that. And this woman said, "How much have you been drinking?" And I said, "Ma'am, water bottle." By the way, I never bought a plastic bottle of water the entire year, all metal water bottles. Most of them given me by butterfly chapters. And I said, "Ma'am, water, lots and lots of water and a little bit of coffee, that's it." And she still made me walk, and she didn't call a second car, she didn't do a breathalyzer. And when she got done, she said, "Okay," she said, "but your driving was terrible." I said, "Ma'am, it might be, but in this case it was, my struts are gone. I mean, the car's struts are gone." And I got an appointment next week to get it replaced, which I did, and that happened. But meanwhile, this was a seamed freeway, and every time I hit a seam, and she said, "Well, I'm just glad you weren't a bad drunk because I'm getting off in 20 minutes and this would have screwed everything up." So anyway, $1,100 on maintenance. No doubt you want to know the gas because you bought the first tank. The gas cost me $2,686.68. The highest I paid was $5.50 a gallon in Alaska, but also in California I went over 5. You know, this was not the gas year. I thought that first tank was going to get me, 1,000 miles. And the lowest I paid was $1.58 in the Midwest at the end of the year. And the average was $3.47, so that was a tough deal. And would you like to know Powder Milk's mileage?
Average mileage.
Pardon?
Average mileage is
42 miles to the hour. I only got 38 when it was new. Because I drove mostly 55 or less. I seldom went much faster. I could, and sometimes I did when I was in a hurry. But 42, and the dust tank was 49. So I was real happy about that. Total expenses for the year, if I'm not getting too personal, because I was curious, because Ken Kaufman did his for $1,000 in 1973. He hitchhiked entirely, and he hitchhiked 75,000 miles that year. And he ate kibbles, or a box of kibbles. Learned he could do that. So I did
Wait, dog food kibbles?
cat food kibbles.
I'm not sure that's better.
He didn't do that all the time.
Oh, my God.
Anyway, I did not spend $1,000. I spent $16,131.72, which was about $76 less than my income last year. And I need to personally. Food and drink was $5,400, and lodging. I only paid for lodging for 33 nights of the year, and that was $1,900. I did that mostly when Tia was with me because she didn't like sleeping the way and I wouldn't have asked her to, nor would we both fit. But we had, some cabin in Hawaii and so on and so forth. I'm not trying to say Tia's needs were extravagant, they certainly weren't. And then campsites, I only paid for camping 13 nights. And I paid $78.50 for that. And do you know that your gift to me of the federal lands pass is one of the best things you possibly could have done for me. Not only saved me a lot of money in camping fees, but you saved me so many admissions, and I used the federal lands a lot. I know I told you I wouldn't be using national parks much because I couldn't use my net, but I did, of course, but a lot of national forests have admissions too, and a lot of national wildlife refuges, and I used a lot of them, and I camped in a lot of them. You saved me a lot of money with that, so Leslie, thank you. That was one of the sweetest gifts. That was one of the most thoughtful gifts you could have given me. And next year, I can get one on my own mileage because I'll be 62. And then the butterfly. This is what you're really waiting for. These are the butterfly statistics. Some of them really surprised. Some of them I didn't finish computing until today. I might as well start with the big one. Oops. It's a pretty cool gavel. The last report that you will have seen on the blog was 488 species. And I lost one to misidentification that John helped me with. I thought I had a common checkered skipper, but it turned out to be Colorado up in the loop loop. And then I lost two others. I think, they were skippers I thought I had that I had not fully identified, but I was sure they were different. I sent them to Andy Warren. These are old, tattered males, right on the Mexican border. Real possibility of very rare, unusual things, and they were both very, very common things that were sworn, and I didn't get them right. So I lost three of those. So we stand at 485, and I'll be submitting now the annotated list to my certification committee, and I expect I'm in danger of losing 4 or 5 of those possibly if the committee doesn't feel that my site identification is warranted based on the information and the butterfly, but not much more than that. So I'm sure we'll end up at least at 480. Yes.
Do we get our money back?
I was expecting you to ask that. Actually, I saw 576, and you will be billed. My goal was 500, and as I said, yeah, it would have been fun. And I tried really hard to go for 500 toward the end, but the number was it was a good target.
Well, tell me the story of why you could have reached 500, but it would have been.
Yeah, thank you, John. And you could probably help me with this. Okay, couldas, shouldas, and wouldas. First of all, there are 3 species that ought to be species, I think. And I think John probably thinks so too. And at some point, when the evidence is sufficiently in hand, they may be elevated. At which point, we will bill you, Richard. Because, birding big years and birding life years are annotated into the future as the taxonomy is recognized on the AOU list. So the Clytus subspecies of the juveniles hair streak, or skipper that I found in southern Arizona, Andy thinks is almost certainly a different species. The Karner blue. And by the way, I did go to the upper Midwest. I did it in November because I had a free trip there to take part in a Richard Louv Children in Nature type conference. I thought, I don't want to miss that whole part of the country. So I went out for 5 days on my belly in the bogs in Minnesota in the snow and the rain with Ann and Scott Swangle and Sue Borkin, looking for bog hair streak eggs, bog after bog after bog. We never found them. And we also looked for Garner blue eggs, and we found them, and they had never found the eggs in the winter before. The endangered Garner blue, very famous butterfly. And then I went out with Sue Borkin, and we found the winter larvae of the swamp meadowlark, an extraordinarily rare butterfly, and only lives in 1 or 2 sites in Wisconsin, and not very many other sites elsewhere. And I had missed it by a few feet in Missouri. I'd been to exactly the right place, but a day later, I'm not very good with a cell phone. My family made me have one, but I finally charged it up and listened, and there was a message showing me exactly where to go in the state park, and I was a few yards away and missed it. So thank goodness I found the larvae later. So those 3 species will be elevated sometime. Those would put me up 3 species. And then my worst, John.
That wasn't what I was talking about only, though.
The ones I missed.
You could have stayed in the lower Rio Grande Valley.
Oh yeah, that absolutely goes without saying.
Tell us why you...
Thank you. You're good. Keep me on task here. I certainly would have had 500 and exceeded it maybe by another dozen or so had I stayed. In fact, 17 species that I didn't see, according to Ben Bassan, were seen in the lower Rio Grande after I left in the next few days. But I'd already been there 3 different times with the same people, going to the same butterfly gardens day in, day out, the same old patches of eupatoriums, looking for more new stuff. And it was all very interesting and all very delightful, but you know, there's a certain amount you can ask of your readers. And not only that, was coming up to the end of the book, and idea, by the way, this was the big payoff for her patience. We were going to Hawaii, and Ben said, oh, just stay here, skip Hawaii, there's a few butterflies. I don't think so. And so, okay, I only got a few new ones in Hawaii. I would have got more in Texas. And then at the end of the book, they said, come back to Texas, you'll see more here. And I would have, but you know, you got to keep the narrative in mind. And there's no question that trying to build a compelling narrative for this book will have cost me species. I know that. I did some interesting things that didn't necessarily pay off for butterflies very much, but sometimes they really did. And so I decided, got to go someplace that I've never been. Possibility of new species, yes, but something rather more exciting for the end of the book. I was going to go to Dry Tortugas, but timing, weather weren't so good, and there aren't very many butterflies there either. So I went to the Keys. I'd never been to the Keys. To Florida several times, and Elena took me down the Keys and then left me down there. And wonderful new butterflies, Bartram's hair streak, Florida purple wings spread in a wild key out there. And I had 16 on my list that I could have seen there. They didn't all show.
Was it the Acus?
Oh, thank you very much. It was the Miami blue, the famous endangered Miami blue that's much deteriorated in its remaining habitats, partly because of introduced iguanas that are absolutely devastating the food plant, which is called Nickerby. So yes, John, that's right. And there are other things I could have done. I've got days here. I've got a grid of how many species I saw every day of the year. And there's a lot of zeros there. And there were days I was here in the rain, or there were days I was traveling, or there were days I was someplace productive and in the rain. And there are things one could have done differently, no doubt. But that said, I averaged, let's see, I had 3,877 total species sightings on the days. In other words, that's how many different species I saw added up for every day of the year. I mean, do you know what I mean? Like,
not individual.
10 species on January 1st. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So I averaged 10 species per day, almost exactly 10 species per day. I averaged about a little more than 1 new species per day, or 1.5 or something like that. Average number of days per species, in other words, the number of days during which I saw a given species, 7.6. So of all the species I saw, they averaged 7.6 days that they were seen. The number of days without a single butterfly, 86. And most of that was just bad weather. Some I could have managed differently. But that made a big hit, of course. Highest number of species seen in one day, 80. Lowest 0. That was in the the lower Rio Grande Valley, working with Ned Bassan, who's a very good, as you know, birder. He's got the highest life list of birds in the country, or he did for a long time. He was the first birding big year person to see more than 700 birds in 1 year in a birding big year. Now, that will never happen to butterflies, in my opinion. Now, could you see 5? Yes, certainly. Could you see 550? Probably. If I'd had better luck in some instances or done some things differently, probably might conceive I could make 550. 6 would be a real stretch. And I'll tell you why. As Ben said, and other bird people, I was with, the birders gone bad. You know, a lot of birders gone bad. That's what we call birders who become butterflies. And a lot of them said this during the year. It's not the same thing. You can bird in the rain. You can bird in the winter. You can bird in the snow and the ice. And you can't do butterfly in these times. And also birds stay there for a long time. They migrate, they nest. Butterflies frequently have a 5-day, 10-day flight period at a given place. So, for example, some of the grails that I missed, the short-tailed swallowtail in Canada, because I omitted Canada in the end, I decided, why just do a little gratuitous flip into Canada? The weather's bad when I was going to go there. I just decided to make it the United States. So I missed that. The Sonora blue was among my saddest grails to miss, the beautiful blue and red Sonora blue. And I looked so hard in so many habitats for immatures as well as adults, and just the weather was bad until I had to go east, and when I got back to California, the flight period was over. So that kind of thing is hard to manage. Everspan's Parnassium and the Mount McKinley Alpine and the Phillips Arctic, all 3 of those species, and I did pretty well in Alaska. But the day after I left, Ken Phillips saw all 3 of those species where I was the previous day. And Everspan's, the yellow Parnassium, was one of my biggest grails of all. And we missed the Kamehameha, the great Kamehameha butterfly in Hawaii, which I've seen before. We didn't go to the Big Island, where it's most easily seen, and I underestimated how difficult it would be to see on Hawaii, especially after huge rains that devastated a lot of the steep trails. So I walked many miles in search of it.
Yeah, but you did get Otis.
Yeah, got what? Oh, yeah. Oh, that was one of the funnest things. Well, what we saw, the other endemic, which is the blackburn's bluet, the Udara blackburnia, we saw a lot of those, and most of the other Hawaiian butterflies. And we saw the banana skipper, this wonderful big skipper with bright red eyes and bright red proboscis. We saw it at dawn in the rain with his tongue poked into a banana flower cluster. Very cool. And there's a little butterfly first discovered in Hawaii just last year in March called Sizina otis. Sweet little thing, a lesser grass blue, from various places, everywhere from oases in Egypt to the Far East. I mean, I don't even know if anybody knows where it originated, but it's been introduced here and there. And it was first found there, and so we were hoping to find it on Oahu, where it had been found, but we're on Kauai, and we're walking on, we went to a farmer's market in the parking lot of a Kmart down lower than most of the rest of the mall. We're waiting for it to open. We were walking up into the mall in bad weather to get something to drink, waiting for the farmer's market so we could buy a pineapple and get out into the habitat. And we're walking by this area where the dumpsters were for the Kmart, and there's this little pink acacia. What's it called? Little pink flowery lawn acacia that's all over the ground. I think it's acacia. Mimosa pudica. Mimosa pudica. Pink powdered puff mimosa on the grass. And Tia said, well, I think there's something down there, blue down there. And I looked and, oh, there was blue, and I was sure it was a pygmy blue, which occurred, they were introduced in the line. Then when I looked, it was too blue for a pygmy blue, a little bit too big. And I had my net, I whipped it out, and I caught it, and it was the first island record on Kauai for the Sizina otis. We got a new island record. But I tell you, anytime you want to go on a butterfly big ear, take Tia, because her eyes spots everything. I'm about to finish. And so when I look at the grails I missed, I got to say the grails I made. You know, the things that were so important to me, the Gillette's checker, my first Baltimores. I'd never seen the Baltimore checker spot. It's this big. Saw that up in Illinois. And all those frillaries and so on and so on and so on. The greatest spectacles, the monarchs at Lighthouse Field in Santa Cruz, though the numbers were low this year. The hundreds of regal frillaries, the spread purple wing, all those alpines in Alaska, and those 3 pearly eyes in the same tree. Things like that. Best genera for me were the dusky wings. I got almost all of them. The fritillaries, I got all but 2. several of the skipper genus, like the Euphies that the dun skipper belongs to, got every one of those. Most of the sulfurs, and almost all of the greens, hair streaks, and elfins that are related to the green hair streaks. I had very good luck with all of those. Worst genus, Amblyoscurtes, the roadside skippers. There's what, almost 20 of them, John? I expected to, well, I didn't expect anything, but I had hoped to see at least 15. And you know, I got to Arizona just a few days too late, they're all gone, and the only 3 I saw were like, bang, and then they're gone. Ended up with only 6 species of them. Now, that could put me over 500 right there. I'd seen the roadside skippers I anticipated. So, you know, you can't tell what's going to happen. One day later in Alaska, you know, and so on and so forth. Well, I will finish by saying, oh, and I saw every single butterfly species that occurs in Washington, not in Washington, but in the year, with the exception of the common branded skipper, which ain't too common, the Nevada skipper, the, what do we call it, the creamy marble wing, Euchloides.
Desert marble.
Desert, maybe it's desert marble wing. And the nasties, sulfur, and the Aureus angulum. And then if you add the Leonera checker spot, Lindsay skipper, and the California marble wing, I saw all the butterflies that occurred in Cascadia, except for those 8. So I was pleased with that. You've been incredibly tolerant. I want to ask very quickly, because I probably covered most of it, but do any of you have any questions you can just time to ask before my closing statement? Yes?
How many states did you go to and through, and was Texas the most prolific for species?
Thank you. I went to 37 in the end. I, of course, told you I'd be going to all 50 in Canada, most provinces. Skipped a little matter of Canada, and I didn't go to, I went to 37. And I have to say that I had 2 itineraries that would have taken me all across the upper Midwest, around the lakes, and down through, and I would have gotten most of those states. But the entire area was under heavy storm and rain when I had the wind out to go there. Same with New England. I had a little gig in New Haven that took me up there in May. I was going to go to the rest of New England, and the weather was so bad I went to New Jersey instead, and that was pretty productive. So 37 states. And, you know, I haven't actually made that calculation yet, but I'm almost certain Texas will have been the most prolific in terms of numbers of species. Probably Arizona second, maybe Colorado third, maybe Florida fourth. That would be my guess. Any other questions? I told Ivy I was going to leave it after all the questions. Yes?
What kind of car do you have and how did you meet?
I didn't tell you what Powder Milk was. Powder Milk is a Honda Civic, a very basic 1500 cc Honda Civic. The most basic model was sold in the early 80s. And I bought it at Rose Honda in Longview in 1982. And the first trip I took was to teach a butterfly class in Banff, National Wildlife. And on the way, we stopped to have lunch at Mayfield Lake. And a Prairie Home Companion came on. Do you know the radio show? Garrison Keeler was singing the Powder Milk Biscuit song. And she's kind of powder milk colored, you know. People think it's buttermilk, it's not buttermilk. Powder milk colored. And the jingle is, you know, the biscuits that give you the strength to get up and do what needs to be done. So that's a good name. So I named Powder Milk then and there.
Thank you.
And I expect to drive it for the rest of my life. I don't see why not. I can roll the windows down and there's no stupid buttons and electronic. Just like it. What's better than that? We're all supposed to buy new cars, and that's stupid. Yes.
Does everybody know the name of your net?
Oh, thank you. My nets. Darn it! I should have brought all my nets for the personnel here and my binoculars. No, I'm not going to be here without them. Oh, I have them. My most important tool, really, of course, were these. I've had these binoculars ever since New Haven in 1974. They went to New Guinea with me and they've been all over the world with me. And they're small, only 6 power, 6 by 28. They focus pretty close, not as close as some of these days, not as powerful as some do. They're part of my body. They're just part of my body. And then the nets I had were Marcia is my main net, my Colorado cottonwood ball. It's on the back. It's on the picture on the butterflies of Cascadia with me on the jacket picture. And, it's on that picture, yeah. And Marcia has had hard times. been shattered a few times, but it was in pretty good repair for the trip and only broken half twice, and I fixed it both times. And then I had a beautiful, long, extendable aluminum net called Akito, given me by a lepidopterist named Akito, and it compacts down so it's easy to put in a suitcase and the net folds up, so a real easy traveling one, and also makes a really good walking staff. And then I had a regular BioQuip little wooden net, jump out of the car quickly, and then I had a little tiny hand net that is sometimes called a national park net, but of course I never used it. But I only had the metal net in Alaska, and it broke. I mean, the steel broke. The spring steel broke. And so, fortunately, the little tiny hand net screwed on perfectly to the top of the big Japanese net. There's great big pole, and this little tiny net. It was very dumb, but it worked. Any other questions? Yes.
What was it that you said that if you were crossing the border to Canada, if they saw it in your car, they'd be taking you?
Thank you. John Shepard, a great lepidopterist friend of ours who lives in BC, has said that it's become more and more difficult if the perception is that you might be transporting livestock, whether it's for a pest aphis issue or for an endangered species issue or anything else. And he tends to get a lot of crap if they see nets or specimen cases or anything like that. And I didn't need that kind of trouble. And besides that, the weather was bad in a lot of those places. I should say, and thank you, I mentioned I had a lot of encounters with the police. Always cordial, always interested. One Texas Ranger, tall, handsome, beautiful man with a beautiful uniform, smoky hat, and he came up and he stopped, he got out of his car and he said, yes sir, he said, seems to me you're on the wrong side of that fence. And I was trespassing this, but it wasn't posted, it was just fenced, and it was easy fence to climb. Nice flowers there, and so I said, yes sir, I almost never do that, I'll get right back over. He said, it's okay, he says, it's just that around here, the folks tend to shoot first and ask questions later. I said, yes sir, thank you, I'll be right out here. And he tipped his hat and drove away. And then the landowner drove up, and it was this young man, pearl button, cowboy shirt, all pressed, and a nice cowboy hat, and his wife, and their baby, and they pulled up, and he stopped, and I said, I'm just leaving your land here, sir. He said, what else? He said, you're welcome to all the butterflies you want. Just, we'd kind of rather you got them on this side of the fence. And then another time, I drove 100 miles of horrible dirt washboard road. My car ended up with that much dust. Didn't mean to, but it was through a national forest. I never knew what that road would be like, and I got finally out of there. I thought I was never going to get out of there. And a similar deal, young rancher, his wife and their kid, after midnight came up, and I stopped him. I said, do I ever get off this road? I was heading toward Cloudcroft, New Mexico, and he said, you know that area, and he said, oh yeah, you go down here, take that turn, da-da-da, and you'll be out and get out to pavement. And I got out to pavement, a little place called Hope, New Mexico, and I was so shattered in this drive, and a long hike that day in the Guadalupes, that I just crashed in this little park. And then I woke up because there were lights, and it was that rancher. He had followed me out to make sure I was okay. And most of my encounters were like that, and most of the cops were great. And one of the cops, this was funny though, he was a Louisiana sheriff, and he was a classic prisoner of the donut shop. And he pulls up, and he says, what you doing up there? And I'm on the roadside verge. I'm not trespassing. A lot of butterflies in the roadside, weedy flowers. And I had my business card printed up with the Xerces Society. On the back, I had a little version of what I was doing. It saved me a lot of time explaining to people, both biologists and officers of the law and so on. I gave it to him. It helped a lot. And he read it, and he turned it over a few times, and he looked at me and said, oh, he said, so, huh? You're with the Exorcist Society. And those are no exorcisms going on. And then the Border Patrol, Johnny, thank you, man, and thanks for the good service. You'll get the letter soon. And then I'm glad you mentioned the Border Patrol, because I had dozens and dozens of encounters with the Border Patrol, because I worked the borders, often at night. Because, you know what the toughest things were for me the whole year? By the way, I stayed well. I didn't have a single sick day the whole year. And you're outdoors every day in the field. It's different sitting here trying to write this book. But the miles, endless miles that you gotta cover, and the time. And then to have some time to eat and cook for yourself and some time to make your field notes at night. And I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of notes that I'm transcribing now to build the ore body that I'll extract the book from. And that doesn't leave me time to sleep. Sleep was my biggest single problem the entire year. I was short of sleep almost the entire year. And I don't know why I say well, because sleep, and I never went off the road. I nodded a couple of times and got off because I'm very conservative about that. I had tragedy in my family from people falling asleep in the wheel, so I tried really hard not to do that, but it was a very present danger all the time. And I told you I'd never drive at night, well of course I always drove at night. Because that's the only time there was to cover the miles. But what I did was I drove freeways at night. There's no oncoming. And small roads where there was almost no traffic. What I didn't drive was two ways with oncoming traffic with the terrible bright headlights of today and drunks on the road. I tried to stay away from two ways as much as I could. Where I slept was largely public lands, free winds if I could. I slept in 5 Walmart parking lots. One of them, a cop came and a cop had directed me there from the Malibu Bluffs, where a cop said, I can't let you sleep there, you'll probably die. It's too dangerous here. So I said, where do I go? So he said, go 70 miles to the Walmart. So I went 70 miles to Walmart, got to sleep. The cop woke me up and said, you can't sleep here. I said, to the Walmart. And he said, yes, but it's probably the only Walmart in the country where you can't sleep. It's a town ordinance. But he didn't make me go. I slept in 5 Walmarts. You know, sides of the roads, quiet communities, any number of places where, and I felt safe most of the time when I could actually lie down. But sleep was a real challenge. But the Border Patrol, since I traveled so much at night on the border, I was not interdicted, but stopped, whatever you want to call it, many times. And then in the habitats, I worked right on the border by day. I'd be careful because of the drug traffic is the one thing to be afraid of. And I tell you what, I worked the habitat at the extreme corner of the country. Did you know you can put your foot on the southwest square inch of the United States, where the wall meets the ocean, south of San Diego at Borderfield State Park? And I worked that park all day. Nobody there, no public in this state park. The Border Patrol said they couldn't keep me out of this park, but there were dozens of Border Patrol agents there and 2 helicopters overhead the entire time. And you look across the wall, and the wall is perforated there. It's actually planks, metal planks, because these waves have to come through. And you look through, and this lively scene in Tijuana on the beach, all families and lovers on the beach, and all guys up at the bull ring yelling at me, hey, Ringo! And I'm going, hey, man, I put my foot through into Mexico, and they all clapped, you know. The Border Patrol sitting up here, and I'm looking at them. What the hell is he doing? They said, it's okay, just want to be out there. And on our side, nothing. I mean, it's an ecological preserve, no people. And he said, you want to be out of here before dusk? Well, I didn't quite, because I watched the sunset on the beach. It's a wilderness beach. And just south of San Diego. But dusk came, and I saw 9 interdictions right then. I saw people chasing each other and tackling people and yelling back and forth. I mean, it's this big game. It's not a game. It's not a game, but it's like that. And finally, I'm there washing my feet because the water's not all up here, there, and getting ready to leave in the parking lot. And here's the Border Patrol going every which way, and ATVs and running on foot, and sounds in the night. And I'm ready to go, and I say, gentlemen and ladies, I'm leaving now. Thanks for the hospitality. They said, that's cool. See a lot of butterflies, and they had 9 people lined up there to take that. It's crazy, all along the border. And by the way, I saw the wall being built in Arizona and in Texas, and they're building it right through some of the nature reserves. And partitioning is terrible what they're doing to the reserves down there. But I had a lot of encounters with Border Patrol, and generally they were always friendly, always nice, and it very often devolved into a seminar on reptiles. I stopped for 17 black-tailed rattlesnakes on the road in one stretch of New Mexico highway on the border. Sadly, the majority of them had been dead. Not all of them, some big ones were not. I got them off the road. But I find that makes a good snake stick. And one guy stopped. Every time I stopped for a snake, the Border Patrol came out. But one of them had a herpetologist for dad. Interesting time, folks, but I will conclude by saying simply this. If you ever want to do this, talk to me first. I'm going to publish some tips for whoever might want to do it next. Very challenging, A lot of work, a lot of fun. People, hugely helpful and essential, also very time consuming. Finding that balance is a challenge. But it was so wonderful to encounter people in the field like Dave. And I would say overall, that it was one of the greatest privileges of my life. And such a field trip.